Hello and welcome to Bastionland Broadcasting, where tonight we are looking through a. I hesitate to call it a game. See, seconds in, I'm already like caveating this whole experience by making it clear that this is a playtest document. Let's rewind a little bit, and I'm going to turn my microphone down because I'm absolutely booming on the levels here. Okay, so tonight I wanted to come on and talk about Intergalactic Bastionland, what it is and where it's at and where I would like to go with it in the future. We, those of you who have followed me, I'm going to try and keep this preamble to, let's say 2 minutes, but you know how these things often go. Those who've been following the blog for a little while since Electric Bastionland, you will have heard me talk about Intergalactic Bastionland pretty close after I finished Electric. And this was actually the project that I had lined up in my head as the kind of natural follow-on for Electric Bastionland, because in that book there's lots of references to the living stars and things that would connect naturally to going to a space-based game. And I kind of bounced around a few things for a bit. I'm sure there were a couple of times on the blog that I posted a post saying like, this time for real, it's happening. And I think the one that I saw today, I was going back and looking through some old posts, and the one that I saw today was from 2020, which is no, it must have been 2021. No, you know what? I think it might have been 2020. Yeah, that's kind of scary to think about that it was that long ago I was talking about it. And then, of course, I got distracted by Mythic Bastionland, which turned out to be a very good distraction, and I'm very happy with how that ended up. But for the last sort of, well, ever since Mythic's been out, really, I've been tinkering with this idea for Intergalactic and trying to get a sense of what I want it to be, what I want to do in terms of like with my next game, because I know what I really don't want to do is just take Mythic Bastionland and put like a sci-fi coat of paint on it, because it would be very easy to take that game, take the myths, the whole system of myths and omens, and turn that into like, I don't know, maybe those are things that happen on certain planets. You could take all of the knights and turn them into like space adventurers, or they're like star wardens or something, and you could just have another set of knights with a different name. But I didn't want to do that. I only wanted to make another game if it's going to feel like a very different type of game while still having some connection. Well, that's my 2 minutes. Listen, if I don't get into this document soon, it's going to be a disaster. So that is absolutely not the right scene to go to. Here we go. So Intergalactic Bastionland. We're going to go through it one page at a time. This is a playtest edition, and this is currently available. If you go to bit.ly/IB playtest, you can playtest this now. And as you'll be able to tell from looking at it, this is a super early playtest. I got very scared releasing this playtest because I forget how rough Mythic was when I released the playtest, because when I did the first playtest for Mythic, the first public playtest, it was pretty rough, and it was missing a lot of stuff that makes it what it is today. So I eventually bit the bullet and I thought, right, I'm releasing it on this date. No matter what state it's in, I'm going to release the first version of the playtest on February 9th. And I have done. So this is my small caveat that it's missing a lot, obviously. So why put out an early sort of untested, very rough playtest? The point is I want to get like a big picture of how it feels, because the structure of this game is the thing that I'm really interested in. There's lots of little bits of rules to fix and like change this number up a bit, change this number down a bit, but it's the overall structure of the game is what I want to get working. And that's kind of there at the minute. With let's jump in. So what is Intergalactic Bastionland? Bastion is dead and the stars are alive. This poem might need a bit of work. It's not quite the it's not quite the opening poem from Mythic, which is a bit longer and more flowery. This might get a little bit expanded. Okay, so like I said, it's much like with Mythic, I want the setting and the game to stand on its own, so that if you've never picked up one of my games before, you can still pick up this game and play it, and it doesn't feel like you're missing something. So there are connections to Bastion, um, whether that is the Bastion of Electric Bastionland or the city of Mythic Bastionland, but you can kind of ignore them if you don't know those games, or you can kind of connect them if you want to have a bit of a thematic link. So Bastion is gone. That's one of the first things that I knew when I started writing this game. I knew it was going to start with Bastion is dead, but the stars are alive. So Bastion is the old home of humanity. It's gone, but some people just won't accept it. And then we've got a bit of information about space and some sort of things that you might need to know going into this game. And one of the first ones that comes in that's really kind of important from a game point of view is that you work on a starship. And that was when I moved in that direction, that's when I felt like I had a real sense of what I wanted to do with this game, because I've played lots of sci-fi games where you are a scrappy crew of, 5 people, maybe a couple of NPCs, and you are on a little starship. You're on a small ship, and you make up the entirety of the crew, and you're kind of sent out into the galaxy to do what you want. It's the traveler model, I guess. And I like that a lot, but I feel like there's so many games that do that. The world does not need another game where you do that. And while that is something you can do in this game, I am much more interested in the idea of being a member of a crew on a huge starship. So we're talking 1,000 crew. The reason I sort of landed on 1,000 is I was thinking about numbers, because it's very hard to conceptualize large crowds. Like if you tell me to picture 100 people, 1,000 people, 10,000 people, it all gets very abstract very quickly. But 1,000 people, strangely, when I was looking up like points of reference, the average like secondary school in the UK is about 1,000 pupils, and that kind of feels like a good amount of, if you remember being at school, it feels like there's so many people that there's lots of people that you don't know, but you have cliques forming and you have politics and you have, well, this group doesn't like this group, but it's small enough that you kind of are involved with everyone, but you're only directly involved with like a handful of people, really. And we'll come back to the school comparison, because there's another point on this later on. So no matter how many times I quit teaching a long time ago, but apparently it keeps dragging me back. So you work on a ship, and having a long-term ambition at the moment, it's left a little bit broad. And this is something I would like to tighten up. And I think this is something that will come from playtesting, because my experience with playtesting is, like I say, it's not about finding the numbers that need tweaking. That is part of it. But when I'm playtesting, I'm looking for those little bits of gold that people really enjoy. I'm looking for problems as well. But often some of the best bits of the game sort of emerge from playtesting, whether that's just a little random table that needs to go in there, or something like the Oath in Mythic Bastionland. I think that was something that I just tested out, and as soon as I tested it, I knew that the Oath was something I wanted to make into a more central part of the game. So in Intergalactic, there's no Oath. Instead, at the moment, you're just working for retirement, which is a little bit weak, I would say. I don't know. It might stay. It's something. But at the moment, you're just trying to earn enough frags, which are your currency, enough frags for a good retirement, or potentially to buy your own ship, or a boat, or a frigate if you want to go smaller, and go out and go independent. So it's not got the overarching like thing of like find the city and stuff from being a knight, but this game has a very different tone to that, whereas Mythic has that kind of fairy tale reality of like you are a knight and this is your destiny kind of thing. This is more, despite being in space, ironically, this is probably a little bit more grounded and a bit more like a normal person almost, rather than this. The knights in Mythic Bastion can feel like kind of characters from myth almost, as much as real people. So some of your goals might be getting financially independent one way or another. So character creation. Again, I didn't want to just have 72 knights under a different name. I wanted to have something that was a bit of a nod. I was interested in doing a nod to the life path system from Traveller. And while I love the life path system in Traveller, and one of the most fun sessions I've had was doing that with a group of players ahead of a long campaign. We did like a whole session of character creation and went through the life path system, and it was great. But it means that you are then very invested in those characters, and if one of them dies, it's kind of unsatisfying for that player to have to either go through that life path system again on their own, or they kind of get like a pre-gen and they don't feel as connected to everyone. So I wanted, like, could I make like a lightning fast version of that? So you are going to roll for 3 worlds that are important worlds in the background of your character, and each of those worlds will be connected to where you were born, where you were made, or where you were broken. And it will give you some stuff, it'll give you a skill, it might give you a special ability, and importantly, these are all worlds that will be in the game. So these are planets that you will be going to. So you might go back to the place where you were born, you might go back to the place where you were broken, and you've got a load of bad history in this place. So I like that as kind of a way of tying things in to the different worlds. It feels like you get like a really lightning fast life path without any of the choice, which might sound bad, but it's the choice in the life path system that makes it such an involved process. And I just wanted to make it lightning fast. So as part of the crew, part of the inspiration for like wanting to be part of a crew was I've been playing a lot of Paranoia, and there's a lot of Paranoia influence in this book for sure. Certainly the way that I run Paranoia. I've been playing Paranoia, and the thing that I really like there is you have a job in Paranoia. You generally have 2 jobs because you're a troubleshooter, but also you have like your day job. And you're also part of a hierarchy. So you're like a red clearance citizen, but there's going to be orange and yellow and so on that are above you, and you're going to bump into citizens who are below you. And I like games that work with that kind of hierarchy. You saw it in Mythic, really, because knights were part of a hierarchy, although it wasn't quite as strict. So I thought it would be fun to explore a game that has a really strict hierarchy, and being the crew of a ship essentially is, it's bordering on like military levels of hierarchy. So I thought this would be a fun thing to play with. So you're going to be heads, who are the kind of middle management of the ship. You've got the officers above you who talk to the captain, and they're like the big cheeses of the ship. You've got the hands underneath you, which are like the 90% of the ship that are doing all the work, and you're the middle management in between. And together you are going to form a table, which means you eat lunch together, but you also stick together to look after each other. This is exactly what I mean when I say that I will bend a setting to suit the game's needs, because I needed a way for the characters to stay together and not necessarily force them to stay together, but like, well, why are they invested in each other? And it's one thing to say like you're just friends, but having it be a little bit more formal than that and being like, oh no, we are kind of like a clique that's like, we've made a deal that we're going to look after each other. That tells you something about the setting. It's kind of blunt, but it kind of works because it's like, well, we've agreed to do this. I guess the equivalent in Mythic is, again, in Mythic, you've got the Seers. So the Seers just say, you knights are going to stick together. So I had to do something a little bit different with this one. I can see questions coming in. I'm going to come back to some questions, but if I start answering questions mid-page, we're going to be here all night. So a relatively late addition was this idea of double duty detail, where you have your job, but you also are doing double duty. So on each trip on the ship, you're going to be doing your job, but you're collectively going to be covering for someone else who's not there. We'll come on to that a little bit when we look at the list of head positions. But essentially, it means you're going to be doing something a little bit different on each transit. And then finally, another relatively late addition that I think has really cool potential is this idea of seniority. So you have your rank, which is how much authority do you have? And then you have your seniority, which is how experienced you are and how much sort of social weight do you have. And it's kind of an informal rank that sits alongside your normal rank. So you might be a head, but you might be a third head. So third being the lowest rank of seniority, which goes first, second, third. So if you're a third head and you're talking with a first hand, you're talking to someone who is, in terms of authority, they are below you, so you can boss them around. But in terms of seniority, they are above you, so they probably know the shit better than you, and the people respect them more. And if you ever worked in management, this is a situation that you'll be familiar with. Or maybe you were on the other side of it and dealing with management who were less experienced and respected than you were. And again, I think that's just like a fun social dynamic to work with. Okay. I'm not going to go through all the ranks, but the ship has a very tight hierarchy of who's in charge of what. But there is deliberately lots of overlap, because that's something that I really like about Paranoia. In Paranoia, there's the thing that took me a while to get to grips with. In Paranoia, there are these service groups that every citizen is assigned to, and they work in a particular part of Alpha Complex. This isn't a Paranoia review. You don't need to know everything. But there's like 8 service groups, I think. And I remember initially being kind of annoyed because there's a couple of them that have like crossovers, and it's not super clear which service group is responsible for this one thing. And I thought that was originally a fault, but it's actually like a really good feature, because it means you can have arguments where people from different service groups can just blame the other service group, or maybe they want to be responsible for that, so they try and like land grab it. So there's potential for that here in these different head roles. So that's kind of then everything you need for your character. So your character's going to have 3 skills. We'll come back to the skills. 3 skills, a few bits of equipment, and a guard score, like in Mythic Bastionland, and they're going to have a position, a head position. So their sort of role within the ship. So it could be that they are the store tallier who's responsible for inventory records. It could be the addresser who's in charge of internal pings, the chaplain who's in charge of spiritual needs. Yeah, so that they get that as well. Okay, playing the game. So the action procedure, very similar to Mythic. Saves is where things start to look a little bit different, but also familiar. So I mentioned skills. So in this game, unlike all of my other games in this series, from Into the Yard, Electric, and Mythic Bastionland, in those games you always had set ability scores. So in Into the Yard it was strength, dexterity, willpower. Electric, it was strength, dexterity, and charisma. And Mythic, it was vigor, clarity, and spirit. And you had 3 ability scores. You rolled them, and that was the number you were trying to roll under in order to pass a save. In this game, you don't have those. Instead, everyone has a unique set of 3 skills. So each world will give you a different skill, whether you were born there, made there, or broken there, which means there's 3 times 72, 200 and something. There's that many skills, unique skills. And it means that your characters are going to end up looking quite different to each other. So you might have a character who has, well, I'll tell you what, let's jump over to the pre-gens. I don't have the pre-gens. This I can make up 3 skills. So you might have 3 skills that are like driving, interior design, and interrogation, and those are your 3 skills. If you try and do something related to one of those 3 skills and there's not a serious risk or pressure to it, you can just do it. So it doesn't matter how low your score is in that skill. Just having the skill means you do have competency in that skill. The number only comes into it when you need to make a save, and saves only come in when there's a risk. So if you have driving score of 3, which is really low, you can drive just fine, absolutely. All the time you can drive. But if you're trying to drive and there's a risk, that's when you would need to make a save, and that's when you would start to seem like a less good driver, if you see what I mean. So having the skill and a low score doesn't mean you're bad at it necessarily. It means you have some skill in it. You're just perhaps not good at it under pressure. And yeah, this is one of the biggest changes, is having these skills. And if you're trying to do something that you don't have a skill for, you use the closest skill but you halve it. So there's a little bit of my concern, which I've spoken about before, is that I don't want this to just turn into like a debate where anytime someone has to make a save, they're kind of like rolling out this bizarre argument for why it applies to their highest score. I kind of trust groups to work it out and kind of like find a balance there. But it's something I'm very interested to see how it goes in testing. We will see how it goes. Combat is also different. We have a slight change to the system where there'll be things you recognize from Mythic, like gambits. Feats are not in here in the same way. I've got a few ideas about feats that I'm coming back to, but they're not in this version of the document. Instead, you've got a much more brutal wound system. So, well, anytime you take damage that in Mythic would go on to your Vigor, so if you take a hit, essentially, if you run out of guard and you would normally take Vigor damage, instead you consult a wound table to see how bad that wound is, and you'll see the wound table. There's a big wound table for 6 different types of damage, and it's very maximalist, and it feels like a lot, and it seems kind of counter to what I normally try and do with games, which is to streamline things back. But this is not really a game of... I don't see this as being such a combat-focused game as Mythic Bastionland. Well, Mythic... combat isn't assumed in Mythic in the sense that you can go through a lot of the game without fighting, and it's usually good to find a solution that isn't fighting. But in that game, you are knights, and combat is always an option, and the knights are also super powerful. So like, it's going to combat can feel like it even though it's not assumed, it kind of feels like it can be assumed that at some point your knights will fight. In this game, there's not always a reason to fight. Like, if a fight happens, it's usually because you've made that choice, and it's not got the same combat focus as Mythic. So you've got this really nasty wound system that is a little bit more work to track, but I like that it makes combat feel very horrible. Like you've got these horrible injuries that you're picking up, and it feels like you just want to get out of there. It doesn't feel as sort of cinematic, if you like, and heroic as Mythic Bastionland does. Other than that, it's, there's some other changes, but this will also feel familiar. Rallying is also a controversial move here. There is a way to regain some points of guard if you can kind of get to safety, and this is kind of there as a bit of a counterbalance to the slightly more deadly combat, because if you start getting a hit and you're out of guard, it can be an incredibly dangerous place to be. So pulling back and just restoring some of your guard can kind of sometimes be a good decision. And this is that wounds table. So let's do an example. So let's say you had three points of guard and 1 point of armor, and you took a hit for 8 points of damage. So that would be, the armor would reduce that 8 points of damage down to 7. And then of the remaining 7 points of damage, 3 would come off your guard, and that leaves 4 points of damage left. So the excess 4 points of damage is what you look up on this table. And let's say it's a burn weapon. Let's say it's some kind of laser. So if you go to number 4 on the burn column, you will see a blistering char. So 1 extra trauma, which we'll come back to, and you will increase your maximum guard by 1 to a maximum of 4. So if you remember scars from Mythic and Electric, it's kind of similar to that. It's a way where you can pick up extra points of guard, but it can be really nasty as well. So trauma stacks up each time you take one of these wounds. So you get 1 trauma every time, and then some results like this will give you an extra trauma. And they get added to any other times that you check this table. So next time this character gets hit, they're going to add 1 trauma because they took a wound, 1 trauma because of this blistering char result. So they're going to be adding 2 to the result. And once you start getting to 8 or higher, these are what's called critical wounds, which is when you're essentially down and out of the fight. and they can get really horrible. Okay, technology. It wouldn't be a space game without talking about how technology works. And something I knew early on was that I did not want this to be a hard sci-fi game. This is not our space. This is not our future. This is the space and the future of Bastionland. And if you played Electric or Mythic, you know that it doesn't always follow the same rules as our world. So I had a little bit of freedom, but I did still want it to feel like space. So there is like a nod to things like travel taking a long time, communication taking a long time, but I'm not trying to like simulate, well, how long would it really take to get between planets? We're using soft sci-fi rules, but we're aiming for it to still feel like space. It shouldn't just feel like being on the sea. It should feel like you should still have a feeling of space. So frags, I saw someone ask about frags. So frags are stellar fragments, and they're sort of like condensed power. So in an earlier version of the rules, there was more of a thing where they were used to power certain items, but that kind of got cut. So they're still in their currency form, but there is still a mention of how they are also used to provide passive power. Because there's not, for a game about ships, there's not much focus on fuel. I wanted to, well, let's come back to this when we get to the travel section, but I wanted to change the focus away from sort of fuel costs to something else. Machines are back. So if you knew about machines in Electric Bastionland, it seemed like a natural place to have like an equivalent in this setting. So we have mainframes, which are big computers, modules, which are smaller machines, and robots, which are essentially machines as people. And these are all forms of intelligent machines. So if you're dealing with a computer, you're dealing with an intelligent kind of being that has a personality as well as being a computer. And another weird thing on here that I'd like to do more with is a type of machine called modules, which are like specialist machines. Due to a collective pact, modules each fill a specialist role, and no one module can do everything. So they're kind of like they've unionized, and they've said, well, if I'm the scanner module, I can't do everything. So there's no general purpose computers. Even the mainframes, which are these big computers, are very good at controlling other machines and knowing things, but they can't really do much on their own. We have some very simple guides for communication and how long it takes. And then gear. So much like in Mythic, I didn't want there to just be like a big price list. There may be prices on this at some point because it could be useful. But again, this isn't really a game about buying loads of stuff. If you want to get some combat armor and a rifle on the ship, you've got to go to the arsenal and speak to I don't know, I can't remember the name, the gun warden or whatever, whoever's in charge of the weapons. Go and speak to them and explain why you need it, and maybe call in a favor, and or maybe they'll lend you some equipment and they'll call a favor on you later. I'm much more interested in those kind of dynamics. I don't see it being like a strict barter system. Like I don't see you like bringing your stuff into the commissary and trading it for other stuff. I think it's more about relationships, because that's always something that's more interesting to me in games. Having relationships as a currency and favors more so than like stuff. Okay, we have 3 broad classes of vessel, and some sort of variations, but the main thing we need to know here is that you're starting on a starship, which is a ship with 1,000 crew. And then life as crew. This is kind of the structure of the game. And this is something that I think is going to be key to making this work, is understanding how to pace this, because I knew that I wanted the game to have sort of drama happening on the ship and dealing with this big hierarchy of people. But I also knew that I wanted the game to be about going to other planets and like exploring space and going to different places. And I thought about formalizing this in this system called the wheel. So this is like an in-universe term. So crew will refer to the wheel as kind of like, oh, this is just like we keep doing the same things over and over again. We're either in transit, we're in the dock, or we're on layover. So these are kind of the three phases of the game. Now, it's not quite like the phases in Mythic Bastionland, where you got phases of the day. I could see sessions where you just do one of these. So like a session that just takes place during layover. I could see a session, and this is what I've tried to do in my test so far. I could see a session where you try and do all three. You do transit, you dock at a world, and then you have layover on the world. What I'm really interested to try is speeding things up and saying, well, could we do a session where we're zipping around a bit more quickly and we're dealing with each of these steps of the wheel in less detail, but we're covering more space? That's something that I'm still working out. I'm interested to see how people find it. For now, I think a good rule of thumb is to try to do all three in one session, but if it feels right to zoom in, then zoom in and enjoy it. And we'll talk about each step of the wheel as we get to it, because they each get their own page. You do have a ship's code, which is kind of a nod to the oath from Mythic, but rather than being something that directs the players, this is more something that's going to just be a reason why you're in trouble. Like if you went against one of these parts of the code, someone's going to tell your superior officer. So it's kind of a twist on that. And then we've got some stuff to do with capturing that kind of naval feel. So you've got watches, what you should call your officer and your subordinates, nods and knocks. This is an easy paragraph to miss, but I think these two paragraphs here are really important, because there is a sort of in-universe term for nods and knocks, which is like a nod is a favor someone owes you. So if you help someone out, they might say, I'll give you a nod later. If you do someone wrong, they owe you a knock. So they sort of have like a justified reprisal, so they can do something nasty to you later, and they can say like, oh, well, it's just a knock. So it kind of like, and then you're even. So I think tracking this, and this might be something that I actually track on a sheet somehow for like all the NPCs, because it would be really fun to know who kind of owes the characters a favor and who owes them a knock. And then we've got like a nice little role to do if you need to know how well someone did their job, just very quickly. Space combat, this is you know what, I have not tested this at all. I have tested it like literally just rolling dice and trying out scenarios and seeing what happens. I've not tested this at the table properly yet. I very much like the idea that when space combat happens, you don't zoom out and now you're like steering the ship around and it's like you're playing asteroids. Instead, I like the idea that when space combat happens, and I'm stealing this phrase from Sean McCoy of Mothership, but like space combat should be a disaster for the crew. It's not like a triumphant moment, it's a disaster. So at the moment it is very kind of brutal, and you kind of just trade fire until someone stops. In terms of the firing, there's not sort of much stuff about like range bands and like moving in and out. It's all very much just like two ships going to trade fire and then decide whether you want to surrender or flee. There's a nod to extra stuff like boarding and hacking, and I would like to expand this more, but at the moment that's a very basic section. And then you've got a nod about the ship layout and how you deal with a very large ship like this. And then you have a second, it's not a wound table, it's a wreck table. So this is when if a vessel gets hit by certain types of damage, what happens to it. And I would like to punch this up, because the thing I like about this is I like the idea of, like I say, if combat is happening and you're one of the crew, you're having to deal with, putting out fires, literally or figuratively, running around the ship, putting out fires, dealing with things. Maybe a compartment gets blown out and a load of NPCs that you knew were there. I like that idea. So I'm trying to think of ways to integrate that without making things too difficult. We have the 12 decks of the ship. Now, I would absolutely love, let me take a sip. I would absolutely love to have a 2-page spread for each of these decks. My dream is like a giant cutaway piece of art that has like labels of all cool stuff that's happening, and like hooks and things that you might find on this deck. For now, I'm going to do something myself. But I think having a spread for each of these decks would be really cool, so that if you're in transit and whatever your double duty job is takes you to the logistics deck, you can flick to the logistics deck spread and get like a little bank of ideas and see who's typically there, what's typically going on. Right, transit. I'm going to just glance at some of these questions before we go into transit, because that's kind of the big part of the next section. I mean, the big questions immediately. Chiva Cabra says, I just want to know if I can work on a ship full of mockeries a la Muppets in Space. Yeah, Muppets in Space. There's no mockeries in this document as it stands, but I'm certain they're going to be in here somewhere. Yeah, Unnuclear says about 1,000 people, small enough to be personal, but large enough to be somewhat anonymous. Someone else asks, does it fit into science fantasy like Star Wars, or is it space opera like Star Trek, or hard sci-fi like The Expanse? It's the scale and like the idea of like working on a big ship obviously feels a little bit more Star Trek. I don't see it being quite as sort of fantasy as Star Wars necessarily. Definitely not hard sci-fi like The Expanse in terms of like the grittiness. This is such a rubbish answer, but it's kind of, I'm trying to tap into the bits of each of those things that I like. I like the thing about hard sci-fi is that it feels real, and I like the I like a lot about Star Wars that but I don't want it to quite be so kind of magical and like mystical. Although we'll come back to that when we talk about the living stars themselves. I don't know. That's something that is yet to be discovered. Um, yeah, Agent Noun says the economic scale is mind-boggling. Yeah, the frag scale at the moment is, this is an example of something where I have put some numbers in to allow the game to technically function, but I don't know if those numbers really make sense yet. So yeah, one frag can power a household, so that makes it feel a little bit like it's post scarcity. But 60 frags for a decent retirement, and the starship costs 30,000 frags. Yeah, listen, there's going to be tweaking happening here. Oh yeah, and Bait Expectations says this is the best art they've ever seen in a McDowell book. Yeah, you didn't know that I was such a skilled visual artist. This is madness. Are there going to be 72 different skills for player characters? There's going to be 3 times 72 skills, so 230 whatever. And Ben Power says about the Stephen BSD's incredible cross sections. It's back here somewhere. It is on my bookshelf. I picked that up relatively recently, one of those books. Okay, let's breeze through. So, transit. This is the part of the game. This is the part of the game where the ship is trying to get from one place to another. Now, you'll run into the first example of something that's a bit weird about the current setup, which I like, but I think I'm going to have to really scaffold really well in the game. You don't really have a huge amount of input about where you're going, because so the setting a bearing section details this. So the bearing council, which is the captain and the 6 officers on board, they decide where the ship is going, and it describes here how that works. It's essentially a popular vote. So most of the time, as heads, you may not really, you will know where you're going probably. I think they do announce where you're going, but you won't have that much input on it. You might be able to talk to your officer and suggest something, but a lot of the time you are going to be just going along for the ride, which can feel strange for a game that is about going to different planets, like that you might not have a choice where you go. I see it as an opportunity to sort of. I like the idea of tracking the relationships of the officers in the background in the same way that in Mythic Bastionland I like to have drama between the rulers of the holdings. So I think it could still be interesting. So if you're the arch merchant who is the officer, sorry, you're not the arch merchant. If you work for the arch merchant, who is the officer in charge of making profit, um, they're probably going to want to go to the planet where they can stand the best chance of selling the goods that you have in your cargo for the highest price. But if you are the um, let's say you're the commander at the helm who's in charge of essentially where the ship goes, they don't necessarily care where it goes. They're more interested in keeping the ship running. Um, that's an interesting dynamic because you've got some officers who care very deeply about it, some who don't. So they're going to call in favors to sort of secure the votes of each other. I think I need to do some more work on this to make it sort of easily graspable at the table. But I do have like some faith that we can make this into something cool. But yeah, you don't have a huge amount of impact on where we are going immediately. You've got travel times, and like I said, I wanted to take some of the focus away from fuel as like the main cost of travel, and instead make time the main cost of travel. Um, there's some sci-fi nonsense in this game called the surge drive, and the surge drive lets you travel very quickly, relatively, to get to another planet in 2d6 days or thereabouts, and you don't consume any fuel to do it as such, but the surge drive has to go into cooldown, and the implication is that you're using kind of cosmic energy from the living stars, but the drive has to cool down after you've traveled that far. So it might take you 7 days to get to a planet, but then your ship is kind of stuck there for 7 days. And again, that's a nice in-game reason for why you might have 7 days of free time on the planet. The reason that time is still important is that the ship will have kind of monthly costs, whether it's the salary of the crew and the upkeep of the ship. So again, this is something that you're going to be tracking a little bit in the background to see how profitable the ship is. And again, it's strange because normally in something like Traveller, you're tracking this because it's your ship. But here, I think the referee is going to want to track this to see how the officers are sort of their relationship with the captain and how profitable the ship is, and that will sort of filter down to how the ship feels and how the crew are treated. So you have a system here for how to travel essentially, and then the main section is going to be on your duties. So while you are on this travel, you have duties to perform yourself. Your officer will probably give you a job to do with your duty, a job to do with your position, but you are also filling in for an extra role. So you will roll a random one on each transit, and for this transit, let's say you are going to have to be the librarian of the ship because the librarian is off somewhere. So that's kind of the main crux of this part of the game where you're in transit. You're going to have to be dealing with something. And again, it's a little bit paranoia because it's going to be a little bit like troubleshooting, perhaps, where something's gone wrong on the ship. I am going to have a bank of kind of pre-made jobs, but at the moment it relies quite a bit on Spark tables, which I like using the Spark tables for it, but I think I'm going to have some pre-made sort of tasks ready to go. You've got reprimands, traditions. Again, I really want to get that kind of naval feel. I saw a question pop by. Yeah, what kind of crew is this? Military, mining, trade goods. The answer is yes. You're not like explicitly part of a military, but the ship is. While there are factions in the game, there's kind of 6 big factions. Your ship is an independent ship, which means you kind of have to be prepared to do a bit of everything. So you are doing some trading. So like one officer is in charge of trading, one officer is in charge of security and military operations. You're kind of doing, I guess Rogue Trader is a pretty good comparison where you kind of take in opportunities where they come and trying to cover a bit of everything. You've got travel between the stars. and then you've got incidents, which are the other thing that happen in transit. So these are events that probably happen around the middle of the trip, not on every trip, but when they happen, you're going to flick to uh, a random world, and at the bottom of that world page, where you had the prompts on the Mythic Bastionland um, spreads, there's going to be some incidents, which are just like little events that you need to deal with, and if you don't deal with them, they're gonna get worse as time goes on. Okay, and then dock is the next step of the wheel. So like I say, this transit, you could stretch this out to a full session, but I like the idea of kind of doing this. Let's say you're playing a 3-hour session, doing an hour in transit, an hour in the dock, and then an hour in layover. So we've got some mention of what happens when you dock, and the reason it's laid out so sort of strictly like this is I wanted it to be really procedural. Like I kind of want you to, when you're running the game, I want you to be able to just look down this like a checklist. So, like I said, in transit, the first thing that happens is setting a bearing, working out how far it's going to take, whether they're taking a shortcut or not, then the actual launch. And I like going through it step by step. I ran a traveler campaign a couple of years ago for a little over a year, and I kind of had a similar system there, and I do like that it kind of, you get this nice kind of paciness to it, and the players kind of get used to like the kind of in-world procedure of like what the ship goes through when it's taking off, traveling, and landing. Okay, so when you dock, you've got things to go through, like checking portside news, seeing if the place that you've arrived is in a better or worse place. Every world is going to have a threat, so you're checking whether that is getting worse. Some of those threats will ultimately result in like the destruction of the planet. So I like the idea that things will change a lot as you come back to it. So even if you're staying in one system and revisiting worlds, they are going to change, and you kind of have a choice about whether to intervene if you want to keep those planets around, because generally when the crisis kicks off on a planet, at the very least trade normally shuts down, which is bad for you, so you kind of at some point will want to intervene. Duties, so when you're in dock, you will have different duties depending on who your officer is. So for instance, if you work under the mate of papers, who's responsible for like paperwork and stuff, that you will have to update all records and data relating to this world. So you might be sent out into the dock to go and check on some information, which again, that's not like a full session. These can be things that happen quite quickly and just kind of lay seeds for later or have potential to spiral out. We've got notes on kind of laws and borders, freight, and then we have a speculative trade section, which is slightly strange, admittedly, because if you don't work for the arch merchant, so if you're not in that sort of part of the ship, you might not care that much about this whole system, but I wanted to have this system in here for two reasons. The first one is obviously at some point the players might go independent and they might have a vessel of their own, in which case you can do this speculative trade of buying cheap at one planet and going and selling it at a high price at the next one. Then the other thing is you can sort of, one of the rewards is you can be like loaned out space in the cargo bay of the ship, so you can still do a little bit of speculative trade without even sort of having full control of the ship yourself. Oh, let's knock some of these off. Okay. So yeah, so it's a slightly odd one at the minute, where it can feel like, why is this here if we don't necessarily have access to it? But I do want this to be a toolbox to a certain extent, where certain systems you can dip into or dip out of as the situation arises. And yeah, and we've got a pretty straightforward kind of system here for what planets sell certain things for which price. And then the third and final part of the wheel. So we've had transit was the first spoke, if you like. Dock was the second spoke. Layover is it's the perk that you get because you're working double duty detail, working two jobs essentially. You are one of the few people who are allowed off the ship during that cooldown phase. So like I said, after a ship has traveled to another planet, there's 7 days that the surge drive needs to cool down, which is a nice artificial way of saying that you have 7 days to kill to go out and make a bit of extra money, look for odd jobs, do some off-books enterprise. You're kind of like free from the hierarchy of the ship for a little while. And I like the idea of that contrast of like you get that little bit of freedom, but you know that in 7 days you've got to be back on that ship. So at the moment, there's a few odd jobs here. This is the one that kind of has potential to spiral out into a full session because each of the worlds, we'll come back to the worlds later and we'll show you what the worlds give you in terms of your layout opportunities, layover opportunities. Bruno asks, do you assume interstellar travel being reliable and safe in this system? Generally, yeah, there is a nod to piracy, but I didn't want to just do straight up like space piracy. So the pirates have a slightly different flavor, which we will get to when we get to the factions. Yeah, there are risks. So those incidents that I talked about that you roll for in the middle of a journey, it can be things that happen on the ship, but it can be things that happen to the ship. Like, the most obvious thing would be like getting hit by an asteroid or whatever. Hopefully more interesting than that. Exploration page needs a lot of work, but I want to have some guidance here for like if you go beyond the worlds that are described in the back of the book, or if you're on a world and you want to go beyond the settlements of that world. I want to give a bit of guidance for like what to do when the players go off the map a little bit. Could you in theory miss your ride and get left behind by the ship? Yes, you could absolutely do that. And whereas you might think, oh, well, that destroys the whole system. I think that's just fun because now you have a choice. Like, what are you going to do? If the players do decide to just go on their own, that's absolutely a choice that they can do. But if they want to try and catch up with the ship or get work on a different ship, that is an option as well. I wouldn't just like do it out of nowhere. I would definitely warn the players, like, look, if you don't get back to your ship in time, it's going to be a big problem. But I think absolutely have it as an option. We have a bank of kind of stock characters to use. Some bits that I need to write still. And then we have the familiar spark tables. I didn't want to reuse any of the ones from Mythic, so these are all different, but I do miss certain ones of them. The one that I really miss is like relationship. I think that's one on in Mythic. There's a relationship spark table that I use all the time. So I don't know, we might bring some back and just rewrite them slightly to fit. Okay, so factions. So the interesting thing about this is potentially the first of my games that has like a canonical setting, whereas Into the Odd was very much like, here's an implied setting, and then there's like one page that talks about Bastion, the Underground, and Deep Country, and then you have like an adventure at the back that's just a very small part of the world. Electric Bastionland, it does have like big chunks of the world, like it talks about Bastion and Deep Country, but there's no maps. The world is like unmappable, and you kind of are given principles to sort of make your own content for that world. And then Mythic, while it does have specific content in the myths and the seers, you are building your own realm. And the way that things unfold, it's very kind of dreamlike and story-like, and it doesn't always feel like a solid, real place. And I certainly haven't provided that in the book. But this is going to be a book that, again, I wanted to try something different. I don't want to just do the same thing again and again. With this one, I want to have like a sort of a map of the stars at the back. The current plan is to have 12 star systems that are all connected, each one to have 6 worlds on it, each of which would be a 2-page spread. So 72 places you can go, and I wanted to have 6 factions that kind of are spread across the whole of the stars. I didn't want to have like parts of the map where, oh, this system is owned by this faction, this system is owned by this faction. Instead, I wanted to be like, well, who are the 6 important factions who kind of have their fingers almost everywhere? And it will depend a lot on the system, but you'll see what I mean. I'll go through these very quickly and give you like the one-line concept for what I had in mind for these. So FXT are the free exchange trust. So while at first glance they are kind of just like the mega corporation, they are they are entirely focused on ensuring free flow of trade and information. So as such, they run the orbital ports. They will give you loans to keep the trade going. They just want to keep the money flowing, basically. So there's a lot of big evil corporations, and these are kind of sinister in their own way, but I didn't want to just do the basic thing there. Sovereign are kind of like the very start of like a space UN, I guess, but they're a little bit more like freedom fightery, and are trying to sort of like encourage worlds to go independent, and a lot of that involves sort of taking shots at the other factions wherever possible. They don't want the other factions to control worlds. They want worlds to be independent. You have the Justice Union, and the concept of this one is to annoy as many people as possible. So they in terms of my writing, they started out as like I had a need for like a trade union kind of faction, like labor union, but I also wanted like a vigilante faction. I thought, well, could you put them together? Could there be like vigilante law enforcement plus like labor unions? So that's what I've tried to do with that, and they've got kind of an interesting history. Concord are military peacekeepers / mercenaries that are trying to sort of stir more conflict. These are a little bit basic. These could do with like a little twist, and I do want to inject a bit more flavor into all of these and give them all a little twist away from where they are. The New Compliance Authority, they're the closest thing to pirates, I guess, because they were pirates, but the pirates were brought in and legitimized by the old Compliance Authority, and now they're just making sure that pirates never return because they want their cushy kind of legitimized work in compliance, which is still essentially the same thing of boarding ships and asking for money, but now they get to do it in a more bureaucratic style. And Starpath are the kind of like religious cult and like science archive and expedition team. They're kind of going out and exploring the stars, and if you want to go out into unexplored places, these guys are useful to know, and they have access to a lot of cool technology, but they also want to stop any further development of technology because they sort of believe that it will be bad for the stars if that happens. And then here we go. So this is going to be, the plan is to have 12 star systems. And at the moment we just have 1. And for each of these to have 6 worlds. And you can see kind of how they might be connected. I don't need to tell you that this isn't the final artwork. But, you know, look at the fine. This is pretty good work. Like, I used all the different star shapes I had available to me. And, oh, and I should say, the point of having these different star systems is initially I had like a draft for each of the star systems. Well, actually, originally there were just 6, and I was going to have 6 systems with 12 planets each. I've instead gone for 12 systems with 6 planets each. When there were just 6, I had each of them, I almost wanted each of them to be like a different genre. So the Goldfather was going to be like the kind of corporate sci-fi, kind of traveler-y kind of thing. But then another system might be like more of a war-torn area that feels a little bit more like, I don't know, the Battletech setting, for instance, where you've got like noble houses in a war. And then other ones might be where reality starts to break down completely, and it feels like, I don't know, it might feel like something from like from Spelljammer or something. And I still want to do that. I still want to have each of the systems feel very different. So just be aware that the 6 worlds you're seeing in the system of the Goldfather are of one particular flavor, but there's going to be like 12 different flavors within this cluster. So each star is going to get a little spread like this, which has some like just information that you need in its profile. There's 6 worlds down here, and they're kind of their market type, so you know which one to go to get the best prices on certain items. And frequently spotted vessels who are used for encounters. And I also like to roll this when you get to a port to see which of these ships is like in port at the same time as you. And then for each of the worlds, you get a 2-page spread like this with your planet information. 6 places, of which the first is the port, and then the rest generally go like outward from the port. And then 6 contacts. So as we mentioned earlier, when you're in layover, I tend to just roll for a contact and say that person approaches you and offers you a job. And each of these characters has a specific desire. Now, there's an argument for just making this a job rather than making it a desire, but making it a broader desire means you can come up with multiple jobs for that person if they go back to them again. Whereas if they just had a job which was like they want you to kill this one person, then once that's done, you're kind of done. So I'm trying to find a balance where it's the desire suggests a job that they might give you, but it also is broad enough that you can use it multiple times. A couple of other things of note on here. This law, trade, and tech scores are kind of used like ability scores for the world. So if you need to roll to see whether your ship's going to get like inspected, like it thoroughly, you might make a law save. And if you roll equal or under this law score, then there are going to be extra searches on the way in. Trade is if you're trying to get hold of a particular item. It's also a measure of like how open the world is. So, you know, flow of information as well. If you want to see if they've heard some news recently that's happened in the system, you might roll on the trade, roll a trade save essentially to see if they have received that. And tech is to see if particularly high tech items are available. These are detailed in the earlier sections, mainly in layover, I think, a little bit in doc maybe as well, as to how to use these. It's also just a nice way to, at a glance, get a sense of like the world and how they operate. So these are the thing. This is the character creation part that I was trying to describe earlier. So let's imagine we had a character who rolled the same planet 3 times at character creation. So let's say they got this planet of, which one's this? Ziggurat Works. Say they rolled this planet for both where they were born, where they were made, and where they were broken. And you can do that because it's a different one for each entry, so that you get a different thing each time. But obviously, usually the odds are you'll have different worlds. So in this case, this would mean born. You grew up in a marble city on the magenta grasslands, now lost to jungle. So you get the skill aesthetics, and you can glean extra meaning from a sculpture just by touching it intensely. So born normally gives you like a weird ability that's like, some of them are like a little bit alien. They're not quite as dramatic as the knight's abilities in Mythic, because you get some other stuff as well, but they can be quite weird. And then if they were also made on this planet, you roved the neon jungle managing populations of the most dangerous life. So you get the skill creatures, and then you get this equipment here. You get a nano rifle and a machete. And then if you were broken here, you were a middle manager in the pyramid, made redundant after whistleblowing. So the skill that you get there is delegation. And as your leaving gift, you get a void plant, which gradually kills all plants that share its soil. So your character would have the skills of aesthetic, creatures, and delegation. You roll d6 plus d12 for each of those to get the score in that skill. The rating in that skill, I should say, is the terminology. And yeah, so that's a character. That's everything you need. And at the bottom of the pages here, you can also see these incidents, which I mentioned earlier. Things that will happen mid-journey. These are on the these are at the bottom of these pages. So I won't go through all of the worlds, but we've got 6 different worlds here, which gives you enough to kind of run a little bit. And that is kind of it. So I'm just glancing through the questions now, just to see if I've missed anything. Eric asks, how usable do you think the mythic tables will be in Intergalactic? Well, the thing is, I think they will be usable, but I don't want players to have to like have 2 books. It's very much designed to be a standalone thing. I don't want you to have both books at the table. But certainly when you're preparing the game, you might go back to that book. I suppose you could, but I also want this book to have everything that you need. So I feel like you shouldn't feel like you're missing anything, but if you have both books, maybe you would go back for a little bit of variety. Philip asks, is there any overlap to Mac Attack? Not yet, but you know, there's a lot more worlds to come, so who knows? Yeah, Parasitic Pleasure says, I like the layover phase, but I feel like Shore Leave is a better sounding name for it. Yeah, Shore Leave is probably a more fitting name. None of these bits of terminology are like locked in. Layover is it kind of makes it feel less glamorous, Layover, which I do like, but Shore Leave is potentially better, yeah. Mesh Knight says, do all the factions rival each other? There is a mention in each page about relationships. So normally there's a faction that they're like in theory friendly with, and then a faction that they are like openly rivals with. But there are other mentions in the page, especially in like the jobs list they can give you. There are other mentions too. Even the allies are kind of rivals with each other. Everyone kind of wants the other factions to like fail, because they all kind of want to be on top. And I think that is all of the questions that I can talk about right now. But yeah, thank you for tuning in. And like I say, you can try this out now. If you want to give feedback on how it's gone, you can join the Discord channel. If you want to get this, I should say, you can go to bit.ly/IB Playtest. Or if you just go to Bastionland.com, it's the most recent post in there, so that you'll be able to find it. I don't have any timelines on this yet. It's my main priority, working on it. At some point, it will go to crowdfunding. You can follow the Kickstarter now if you want to get really ahead of the game. But yeah, I will keep working at this. Expect it to change a lot. If you're watching this video in like a year's time, you will be very confused, because I'm sure a lot of stuff has changed very much. But yeah, I think that's everything that we've got for tonight. There is going to be another Bastionland broadcast next week. I'm going to try and do like the next 3 or 4 weeks. We're going to do a little mini series. Next week, I will be doing a read through of a different game, not one of my games. And then after I've done a read through of someone else's game, I think I'm going to do a deep dive into Mac Attack, because I never did do a deep dive video on Mac Attack. So I'd like to go through that book and talk about it, because it always sneaks under the radar. Mac Attack is the real connoisseur's choice. And then I've got an idea for another stream after that. So yeah, maybe the next 3 or 4, 5 weeks, we'll be doing this. Thank you for tuning in. As always, if you want to support the stream, you can go to patreon.com/Bastionland. And if you want to find out more about what I'm doing, go to bastionland.com. All the links are in the sidebar. I will leave you with the extremely high budget trailer that I made for this game. This is not the I would like to do a proper video when there's some, let's say, some artwork to show. But I wanted to have something to put out there for the playtest. So this is what you got. So enjoy this, and I will see you next week.